So at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Bill Freund, who is a longtime member of Temple Beth Shalom. Tonight, Bill will share his amazing story of what his family endured in Nuremberg, Germany, what prompted his family to leave, and how they made their way to the United States. Bill is singularly responsible for bringing at least 15 incredible scholars and residents to Temple Beth Shalom, and for that, we are all very grateful. Dr. Bill Freund is the chief economist emeritus of the New York Stock Exchange, where he was senior vice president and chief economist for 20 years. He served as a professor of economics at Pace University's Graduate School of Business in New York City, where he also directed the Freund Center for the Study of Securities Markets. He received his doctor's degree in economics from Columbia University, and Bill is the author of the best-selling book, Investment Fundamentals, and the co-author of the book, People and Productivity, as well as numerous other books and articles. He's been an advisor to business, governments, and financial institutions, as well as 4 governors of New Jersey. His report, Productivity and Inflation, was published by the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress. Recently, Bill wrote 2 children's books based on his family's history. Available on Amazon, they are The Cookie That Saved My Family and The Towel That Saved Elizabeth. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bill Freund.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Al. I couldn't have written it better myself. Come to think of it, I did write it myself. I'm delighted to be here today, I should say virtually, though I'm actually in my home in New Jersey. Many of you have known me as a member of TBS for decades, which means that I have grown older and now find myself close to the mid-90s. I used to be able to make presentations like this extemporaneously, but I now prefer to read notes on paper, so bear with me. I was born in that infamous city of Nuremberg in Germany, and I spent the first 11 years of my life there. I was young, but I remember just about everything. I have vivid memories, and sometimes I have to admit I'm still tormented by events in Nazi Germany long ago. My daughter Nancy, who is here tonight, traced my family in Germany back to 1773. It's difficult before then because names were, for the most part, not secular. You know, they were Jewish names. They were like David ben Abraham. And so you can't go too far back in history. It was only when Napoleon came, or so I understood from history, that he required everybody to have a secular name. He did that not because he was Philo-Semitic. He did that because he needed tax rolls. He needed names for tax rolls. And so, like others, Jews had to adopt secular names. My father told me that we go back in Germany much further, perhaps to the time of the Spanish Inquisition. And I recently took a DNA test, and most likely our family did come via Spain and Portugal. Nuremberg, as you may know, was an early hotbed of Nazism, and it only got worse as the years passed. I remember as a child the burning of the Reichstag by the Nazis in 1932. That is the destruction of the Capitol in Berlin. That's one of my earliest memories. No wonder that I had shivers when I saw on TV the invasion of our own capital in DC on January the 6th. I remember also vividly the annual Nazi party rallies in Nuremberg, with Hitler stirring up millions with his anti-Semitic rhetoric. My family felt personally threatened at that time. I remember that for safety, my older sister and I were hustled off to grandmother's house out in the country. When Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January of 1933, Jews were gradually deprived of their professions, of their jobs, their businesses, and their shops. I saw many signs in stores reading, "This is a Jewish store, don't patronize it." In 1935, there were the Nuremberg laws, which stripped Jews of their citizenship and their few remaining rights. It's no wonder that after the war, the Nazi war trials were held in Nuremberg. Speaking of the loss of citizenship, tell you a quick story. After the war, after World War II, I received a letter from the German consulate in New York offering to restore my German citizenship. And all I had to do was to apply and submit my birth certificate. And not only could I get German citizenship back, it said, but so could my children and my grandchildren, and I don't know how many more generations. So what I did is I called my children, I called my kids, and I said, "How would you like to become a Kraut?" Well, they laughed at me. Why would we want to become a German? And then they put their heads together and they figured out that German citizenship is citizenship in the European Union, and that might have benefits. And so many of both my children and grandchildren, and now one of my great-grandchildren, who at the age of, 2 or 3 months? No, he's more than that. Anyway, got German citizenship and a German passport. This afternoon, I had a telephone call from a grandson who is presently in London and had been working in London for quite a few years, did not have to get permission to work in London so long as Britain was part of the European Union, and of course his German European Union passport was valuable. I might say that few German Jews who witnessed the Nazis in the 1930s are alive today. For the most part, only those who were kids like me and are now in their 90s are left to tell the stories. Memories are rapidly passing into history. Let me tell you just a few of the stories that I remember and that torment me to this day. I shudder whenever I see soldiers marching. They remind me of the Nazi stormtroopers marching past our windows, singing, "Let the Jewish blood spurt." I remember another story. I remember when my father was arrested, along with many other men of our synagogue. In fact, the Germans used synagogue membership to identify the Jewish men. They were taken to a sports arena in Nuremberg, where they were beaten, badly beaten, and forced to run around a track to, I might say, to exhaustion. And I hate to tell you this, they were forced to eat excrement. Fortunately, the men were released after this indescribable treatment, and they knew then that the sooner that they left Germany, the better. Run for your life was the only logical conclusion. Before then, my father said he was never going to leave Germany. no matter the current danger. The Freund family had lived in Germany for so many generations. He had seen governments come and go in the 1920s during the Weimar Republic, and he expected the same will happen with Hitler. My father's arrest disabused him of this notion, and for that reason, I'm here today. And so is my daughter Nancy, and my daughter Sandra, I see is here, and a few of my other relatives. One more story. Jews were afraid to walk on the street, but I didn't think that an 11-year-old boy would be endangered. So one day, I was walking down the street in Nuremberg, and I was chased down that street by a gang of boys. I should really call them hoodlums. And they were shouting at me, "Jüdisches Schwein," or Jewish pig. I guess I just looked or dressed or seemed somehow to act Jewish. Now, I should tell you that in German cities, they have crates or very large wooden boxes in which they store sand. And the purpose of the sand is that they, in the wintertime, they spread the sand so as to prevent people from slipping over the ice. Well, there was a wooden crate right where we were. And the hoodlums forced me into that wooden crate, closed the cover, and it was a very substantial box, a very substantial cover, and it had to be substantial to prevent people from playing with it, opening it, and so on. They forced me into this heavy wooden crate, and in my desperation, of course, I tried to lift the cover. No success. It was too heavy for an 11-year-old boy to lift that cover. And so I began to bang on it. And you can just imagine my fright. I pounded at the cover, tried to lift it many times without success. Fortunately, someone heard my desperate pounding, my relentless pounding, and raised the cover and allowed me to see the blessed blue sky. Can you imagine what a traumatic event this has been in my memory to this day? To this day, I am afraid of dark spaces. I will allow no clothing to go over my head. I own no t-shirts, no pullover sweaters that remind me of that awful time when darkness descended all around me. I was kicked out of public school, like all the Jewish children, around 1935. My parents then enrolled me in a Jewish school in the next town of Fürth, which was also attended by Henry Kissinger. I did not know Henry Kissinger at the time. He is 3 years older than I am. And how many kids did you know in high school that were 3 years ahead of you? In the late 1937, a year before Kristallnacht, we were lucky enough to immigrate to America and to embark on a new life. I must tell you that I do not consider myself a Holocaust survivor. I don't know how you define a survivor. My definition is someone who witnessed Kristallnacht. But there are other definitions. Anyway, it wasn't so easy to go to America either. We hear a lot about immigration these days. Well, we had a State Department that was viciously anti-Semitic, but we had one good thing going for us. There were quotas. And there was a generous German quota, not for Jews. The German quota was for Gentiles, but Jews qualified under it. And that is how we managed to come to America. The Polish quota, for example, was very small. And they waited for permission to come to America for years. And of course, by that time, it was too late. We also needed, in order to come to America, we needed an affidavit, a visa and an affidavit. And you had to have someone who would vouch for you that you would not become a public charge. My father had a first cousin in America who had come to America apparently in the 1920s, whose name was Louis Joseph. And my father wrote to Louis Joseph and pleaded with him to please send us a visa and an affidavit, or an affidavit, government issued the visa. And he immediately sent an affidavit for us, making all the provisions necessary to guarantee our not becoming public charges. However, there was a fly in the ointment. The American government turned down this affidavit because this blessed man had given something like 100 affidavits, and the government said, well, this already exceeds its financial ability to provide guarantees. Well, you can imagine how desperate we now were. Our only American relative. So in desperation, my father wrote again to Louis Joseph. And can you imagine what he did? He went to the bank, opened a savings account in our names, secured a passbook, and said, here, these people will not become a public charge. They have money in their names. And luckily, the Americans accepted that. Louis Joseph literally saved our lives. And my daughter Nancy here today has a great and intense interest in genealogy. And she just a few months ago published a book. Well, she wrote a book called, I don't know, can you see it? It's called Louis Joseph, The Mensch Who Saved Our Family, December 1876 to July 13th, 1941, 61 years of life. I also remember that when we arrived in Hoboken on the SS Georgic, the first visit we made was to Louis Joseph. He lived in the Hotel Croydon on, I think, 80s, in the 80s. It was an apartment hotel. And the first thing we did was to return the passbook with the money, which really belonged to him. And I want to ask you a question. How many of you, or would you, have done the same thing? Followed an appeal of a desperate refugee, would you have then gone to the bank and deposited a significant sum of money? I don't know. I've asked myself that question. I'm not sure that I would have done it. But I hope there is a special place for Louis Joseph in heaven. The four of us arrived in America in the midst of the Great Depression. We were allowed to take some clothing and even some furniture to America, but there were currency controls in Germany, which prohibited refugees from taking money. We had a family of four. We had collectively $7 when we arrived here in America. We lacked knowledge of English. None of us spoke any English. And we knew nothing about American customs. We settled in Washington Heights, in the northern district of Manhattan called Washington Heights. It was a district for immigrant German Jews. There were German Jewish bakers and kosher German Jewish butchers, and so on. And there was a German newspaper. So you really didn't have to learn too much in the way of American customs and English. Some people called Washington Heights at that time, they called it Frankfurt on the Hudson. And some people in jest called it the Fourth Reich. Despite the Great Depression, my father got a job wheeling corpses at the Jewish Memorial Hospital in New York City. I can tell you that he was not used to menial work. He had been in Nuremberg, he had been a merchant in leather goods and toys. My mother got a job working in a lipstick factory, and I remember her coming home with one of her arms red with lipsticks. In addition to going to school, I shined shoes on the streets of Washington Heights. In fact, that's what I'm proud to this day that I started out shining shoes for a nickel a pair. And also a little later delivered meats for a kosher butcher shop. I can tell you that I never had a childhood. I never can remember ever playing ball on the streets. I never ever made friendships. These were really tough times. My mother was very clever. And here's another story. Nuremberg was known for baking a Christmas cookie, a ginger cookie, called Lebkuchen. How many of you have ever heard of Lebkuchen? Well, I can't really tell. It is a secret recipe developed some 500 years ago. And it was considered a secret recipe. It was passed down through families like, what shall I say, like Coca-Cola syrup is a secret recipe. And the factory that made them, the dominant factory, employed pastry chefs sworn to secrecy, never to reveal the recipe. My mother asked herself, what can I take away in my head that the Nazis can't confiscate? And there was on our block a pastry chef who worked at Heberlein Metzger, the factory where they baked the Lebkuchen. And she bribed him to show her the recipe. And I remember her showing it to her in her kitchen because the recipe was not sufficient. You had to learn how to make it, how to combine the ingredients. And so when we came to America, she carried in her head the knowledge of how to bake Lebkuchen. Lebkuchen were imported into the United States at Christmas time in beautiful tin cans, rounded with almonds on top. And they were sent to stores like Macy's and deli stores and pastry shops from around Thanksgiving through Christmas. But of course, we couldn't start competing with the Lebkuchen that were imported from Nuremberg to the United States. And they were imported in large quantity for Christmas. And besides, they had no capital, they had no knowledge of American business customs. So it was not until 1939, when the war started in Europe, that the Germans could no longer export Lebkuchen to America. Whereupon my parents started to bake Lebkuchen in their kitchen at home. However, a neighbor denounced us to the Board of Health, claiming that it was illegal to bake commercially in a residence. And so my parents had to, well, the neighbor never knew what a favor she did them, because my parents thereupon rented a store on St. Nicholas Avenue in Washington Heights. They somehow, I don't know how they financed it, bought a baker's oven and a baker's mixing machine, all commercial size, and started to not only bake the Lebkuchen, but sell them to Macy's, delis, and so on. And they did this with increasing success during World War II, when no Lebkuchen could come from Nuremberg to America. I spent every non-school hour working in our store. I took care of the billing, I took care of the correspondence, because by that time I was the only one who really knew any English, or knew English well enough to carry out these functions. My father died at the age of 57, and I always thought his arrest and mistreatment had something to do with that. He died in 1950. I really didn't want to become a Lebkuchen baker. Besides, the business had dropped quite a lot because the Germans were once again exporting the product directly. Now you can buy them even at Trader Joe's. And I'm the reigning Lebkuchen expert in the United States, you know, and they are quite authentic and quite inexpensive. But you can get them only early on. They disappear very quickly somewhere after Thanksgiving. I went on to do other things. As you heard in the introduction, well, you didn't hear, I went to City College, where all the bright, poor Jewish boys went at that time in New York City, and went on to scholarships and so on to get a PhD at Columbia, served for 20 years at the New York Stock Exchange as their chief economist, and then joined academia. And sometimes I think that success is the best revenge. Along the way, I want to tell you, I abandoned my name. I was born not as Bill Freund. I was born as Kurt Wilhelm Freund, which sounded terribly Teutonic to me and to others. And so I changed it to William Kurt with a C, Freund, and now I have become a Yankee named Bill. Let me skip to 3 years ago. I had an invitation by the Berlin Jewish Museum to come over and talk to high school students about our story. I felt an obligation to go, accompanied by Nancy, who wouldn't let me travel alone. I talked to over 100 high school students over 3 days. These were German students. This was not to be a speech or lecture, but a conversation, all in German, of course. I must tell you that I was curious as to what the German students, roughly 15 to 18-year-olds, knew and thought about the Hitler time and the Nazi period. The Holocaust is a required topic, but these students knew relatively little about it. It was required, but it was just another chapter in the history books, like Napoleon or Bismarck. They were interested in the personal family stories that I told them, similar to the ones I told here today. It made the Holocaust come alive, become real to them for the first time. They asked me many questions, and I jotted down a few of them, and I thought you might be interested. What would German students ask today about the Holocaust? One question was, where do you think the anti-Semitism that led to Hitler's rise to power came from? I told them frankly that long-standing hatred of Jews in Germany was fostered to a great extent by the church. Jews, they said, killed their Christ. I told them that anti-Semitism was endemic for centuries in Germany. They asked, did you feel more Jewish or more German when you were growing up? I said to them, we were German Jews. German first, we were not Jewish Germans. And our loyalty was first and foremost to Germany. They asked, did you enjoy going to the Jewish school? What subjects did you study? Well, I told them I didn't enjoy the trip because I had to take a lengthy streetcar to get there, but it was a very good school, and we had science and history and geography and also Jewish studies. What were the differences, they asked, between your school in Germany and your school in America? Well, when I enrolled in a school in America, I didn't know any English, and they asked me all sorts of questions which I did not understand. So they put me into 4B. I later made it up by skipping grades and graduated with my normal class. They asked what the difference were between school in Germany and school in America, and it was clearly the school in Germany was more rigorous. They asked whether I'm still in touch with anyone from your school in Germany. I said the Jewish school, I had 3 classmates that also emigrated to America, but they're all gone, and I'm the only survivor. Then they asked, how did you feel when you learned about the Holocaust? I explained that 6 million, which I told them about, is a big number. It's an abstract number. Adults can't really understand it. I told them it was 6,000 thousands, if you can imagine such a number. I told them that I lost many family members. There were 3 in Nuremberg. I had a favorite aunt who was blind. My blind aunt died in Theresienstadt. I had an uncle and an aunt who lived in Nuremberg, and they died in Poland, where they were transported. I told them about the mass atrocity which is so huge that it's hard to grasp. I told them about genocide, systematic killings. They asked, do you still have family in Germany? I said, no. There are, in fact, very few German Jews left. Hitler said he's going to make Germany Judenfrei. Well, when it comes to German Jews, it is Judenfrei today, because the Jews in Germany, and there are about 250,000 Jews in Germany, are mostly Jews from Russia. I asked them a question. I asked them, did you ever talk to your grandparents or parents about the Nazi period or what happened to your family then? No hands went up to respond to me, except for one. And he said, a part of my family went to Argentina after the war. I understood exactly what happened in that family. They asked, well, what was it like in America when you didn't know English yet? I said, as a child, I learned basic English essentially in 6 months. Children learn languages easily and quickly. Not my parents. My father desperately wanted to learn English. He got himself a German-English dictionary and vowed he would learn 10 English words a day. And I can tell you it did not work. I have reflected on the lives of my parents. I had it easy. I didn't have to make any decisions. The decisions were made for me by my parents. What my parents went through in their lifetimes is hard to grasp. They married in 1923 when Germany underwent the great inflation. And it was customary at the time for the parents of the wife to pay a dowry to the new husband, like a bride price, you know. So they saved a lifetime for their daughter to have a dowry. My father said he received the dowry, and it was not enough to pay for one night's lodging in a hotel in their honeymoon. The German mark went from 1 paper mark per gold mark, a mark secured by gold. And ultimately, it took 2 trillion paper marks to equal a gold mark. It wiped out the middle class, of course. My parents lived through World War I. They lived through the influenza epidemic, which killed 50 million people worldwide. They lived through the Weimar Republic, when governments came and governments went, and it set the stage for Hitler. They went through the Great Depression. They went through the rise of Nazis and the persecution of Jews in Germany. And then they went through emigration to America and World War II. It is hard to imagine. Today, the extreme right has downplayed the horrors of the Nazi past. A leader of the AfD, which is one of the parties in the parliament, AfD standing for Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. And one of their leaders described the Nazi era as a minor speck of bird poop in German history. I've been concerned about recent elections in Germany. The AfD accounts for nearly 15% of the Bundestag, or German parliament. The right-wing xenophobic party, they yell Deutschland, Deutschland, just as I remembered as a kid. I never thought this could happen again in my lifetime. And it has affected not only Germany, but other countries like Austria and France, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Slovakia, and the United States. I will wind up with this thought. We have a big job still to teach about the Holocaust. 31% of Americans and 41% of millennials think 2 million or fewer Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. The millennials are ages 18 to 34, by the way. 41% of American adults don't know Auschwitz. I don't want to end my remarks by suggesting there are no decent people left in Europe or America. Let me mention only two recent optimistic events. First, Germany has embarked on an all-out investigation of extreme rightists and will report to the parliament in the future. And this morning, the New York Times reported that the US has started a multi-department government investigation of right-wing organizations in the United States. Second, all of Germany is celebrating a whole year this year, remembering the Jews settled in Germany 1700 years ago to the benefit of the country. With that, I'll end my remarks and ask for your questions.
Bill, thank you very much for what we all knew was going to be a remarkable presentation. I'm switching to gallery view so I can see everyone. Please do remain muted all, and I will call on you. By the way, a measure of respect for you and what we were expecting. I saw that at the height there were 90 devices tuned in, which means well over 100 people have been listening to remarks tonight. So kudos to you. I don't see any questions in the chat. I'm going to start the Q&A with my own question. And forgive me if I missed it in your presentation. You mentioned that your family landed in Hoboken, New Jersey. Did they get ferried over to Ellis Island after that, or were you processed on the mainland?
No, Ellis Island had already closed. This was in 1937, the end of 1937. And so we were not subjected to Ellis Island. We were processed at the border.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. So if anyone has a question, please do raise your hand and I'll call on you. Anyone? Looking around on the screen. Okay, Mikkel, unmute yourself and ask your question. Or Michael.
Yeah. Hi there. I was just interested. I read the Louis Joseph biography that Nancy wrote, and I was wondering, when Bill met Louis Joseph, what was their conversation like, and what kind of person was he? Because from what I understand, he was a businessman working for one of the one for Armour or Swift, or one of the.
Well, I will let Nancy answer that question since she's here. I can't tell you. He was working for Wilson and Company out of Chicago. But Nancy, what do you know about him other than that?
Well, I obviously was not at the meeting since I wasn't born yet, so I really obviously can't tell you what kind of a man he was. We were very fortunate that, as I like to say to my dad, he left so many footprints in the sand. There are so many people where even today with the best genealogy, and Germany has done an incredible job particularly in southern Germany, of keeping birth records. Anytime anybody moved from place to place, there's a record. But he worked for them. He came over in the 1890s to the United States with a brother who was 14 and some cousins who were maybe 16. 4 young boys coming alone in steerage to the United States, probably to make a better life, because in Germany, very often only the eldest son was able to inherit. And he settled in Chicago and made a life working for the Wilson Meatpacking Company, seemed to do very well, and was therefore able to afford, when the time came, to help others. And it was known that he helped anybody from the town he came from, or anybody who was a cousin. And though my father said he was a first cousin to his father, he was actually a second cousin to my father.
I stand corrected.
To my grandfather. So he was pretty distantly related. And when my dad said, would you provide money for a cousin you never met and never heard of, it really was quite generous. But Dad was only 11, and you think about it, when he came, and when he worked at Paula's Lebkuchen, doing all the paperwork, he was a boy of 13 or 14, processing papers, writing advertisements for the local paper. You know, this was a kid.
I might add something that I forgot to say. The only ones who are alive today were children. There may be a few people alive still.
Well, Michael is one of them. He was a boy who has a terrific story himself, of course, who lived through Bergen-Belsen and is, I guess, about exactly 10 years younger than you. But it's true, Dad, that, you know, anybody with any long memory at this point had to be a child.
As a matter of fact, I think I was invited by the Berlin Museum to come over because there wasn't anybody else. The adults were gone, and the only ones left were the ones who were children at the time, like me. Now, I still speak German. I'm pretty much bilingual, but it won't be many more years when that generation will be gone too, and it'll all be history and not experienced by anybody human directly.
Let's hope your words are prophetic and no one else has to experience this. I believe we have a question from Rabbi Shapiro. Is that correct?
Not so much a question as a comment. My in-laws came from Berlin, and they told us stories not dissimilar to yours, but they couldn't get into this country in 1936. They had a 1-year-old daughter, and they had to go to Lima, Peru. And they had to live in Lima, Peru for 15 years before they could get into this country. This country is not as wonderful as we make out sometimes. We know that with the ship the SS St. Louis that Roosevelt refused to allow to land here, and many other things. The other interesting thing was my father-in-law refused reparation because in German it's called Zollgutmachen. He says you can never make it good. But interestingly, he got Social Security from Germany, and it came through the Bank of Israel because Israel was watching that everybody got their money. And so for years, they got Social Security from Germany afterwards.
Yes, I know that existed. People did receive it. In my family, that happened too. I'll tell you what I received in restitution. I once got a check for $1,000, and it was to compensate me for lacking German education. And I took the money.
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe we have Rob Katz wanted to make a comment or a question. Rob, go ahead.
Well, the comment I want to make, it's just to thank Bill Freund. because I may be one of the youngest on the call this evening. I don't get to say that very often, so I figured. Bill was very instrumental when I was president of the synagogue, and I had the opportunity to get to know him during that time frame. And Bill is the epitome of what we all should strive to be. He, in my opinion, was one of many that helped to save our synagogue, to lift it back up with what he did with the Scholar in Residence weekend. And I'm on this call because of my love and my respect for Bill. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done and for the stories that you continue to share. They're enlightening to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you
Rob.
so much.
Beautiful words, Rob. Sharon Shanzer, I believe you have a question. Sharon, you there? I'll switch back to gallery view for a moment. All right.
Oh.
All right. So William Johnston, if you would unmute.
Bill, it's Bill Johnston.
Hello, Bill.
How are you, my friend? Why don't you talk for a second about the children's books and what drove you to write those? I think it's a great story.
Let me identify Bill Johnston. While I was at the New York Stock Exchange, he was president. So I value his contribution in so many
You were a
ways.
great economist.
But yes, during my retirement, I decided I wanted to write up the stories of my mother baking the Lebkuchen cookie. Oh, thank you for holding it up. And that was a result. It's on Amazon, and I receive very generous royalties from it. I think last month it was $5.38. And then I decided I'd write another family story called The Towel That Saved Elizabeth, also true in every respect. And that's another story which I haven't told you, maybe another day, another time. But it's a fascinating story as well, The Towel That Saved Elizabeth. Unfortunately, Elizabeth died a year ago.
All right, we have time for, I'm going to switch back to gallery so I can see people. We have time for one or two more questions. Anyone? I see a hand. Anyone? All right, Esther Rose, let's hear your question. Unmute yourself.
He spoke about the millennials. And I was in line to board a plane last year, and there was a millennial in front of me. And I don't know, somehow we started to talk. And I saw on his arm, there were about 10 numbers written on his arm. And like with a ball pen. And I said, you know, that reminds me of something that happened in World War II. He had a blank look, and I kept prodding him and trying to help him get some kind of an answer. But finally, when I told him, he had no idea what I was talking about. He must have been about an 18-year-old guy. So then finally I said, well, what do these numbers represent? He said, oh, it's someone's phone number that I don't want to forget.
Yes,
That's the millennials.
Jeez.
I think it's very important to have Jewish museums to perpetuate the knowledge of what went on. There is so much for young people to learn. I'm just getting some physical therapy for my back, and the therapist, lovely lady, knows almost nothing about the Nazi period. So I educate her while I'm getting my back massaged.
That's amazing. Sharon Shanzer, do you have your question?
Oh, no, I I don't. I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So I think we have time for one more question. Anyone? Anyone? I see a hand anywhere? Anywhere? If not,
have a
oh, wait a
question.
minute. One more.
I
Nancy
have,
Heller.
I have a comment to Bill. Jerry Lashinsky, a friend of Bill's in New Jersey.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Bill, my wife and her mother were Holocaust survivors. My wife was born in 1939, right before Germany invaded Belgium. They lived in Antwerp. My father-in-law was a diamond cutter, like most Jewish Antwerp people were. When the war started, he joined the army, and him and his friends escaped from the German army at Dunkirk and trained in London for the D-Day invasion. But during the war, my wife was put in a nunnery in Belgium. She was 3 years old. She lived in the convent from age 3 to 6. Next door to the convent was a German prison, not a concentration camp, but a prison where her mother was. The Germans didn't know that her daughter was in the prison next door. But my father-in-law's army pay went to the nuns to feed his daughter throughout the war. And she was in a prison camp. Not a prison camp, in prison. It was a labor camp, actually, for the Germans, war effort. And they didn't know she was Jewish. But she turned herself into the Gestapo in Antwerp, saying she was a dissident, political dissident, and they put her in prison. At that time, the Queen of Belgium persuaded the German governor in Belgium to let all the people who were Belgian citizens in this prison free. She got out of that prison after 6 months of imprisonment, and I originally had the list of all the people that were freed. There were 173 people freed, and she escaped in the woods and worked for the underground during the war.
Terrific story. Thank you, Jerry. I would like to end this now.
And I did send all the documents to the Holocaust Museum in Washington.
Good, very good. Thursday is Yom HaShoah, and I'd like to remember 3 people who I loved very much, who among many others paid the ultimate price. I mentioned them before, mentioned them next close. My blind aunt, Lina Lehmann, who died in Theresienstadt. Her daughter was Irene Sanger. Her husband and 9-year-old daughter died at Sobibor. And my uncle and aunt from Nuremberg, Max Freund, and his wife Bella died in Belzerk. May the memory be forever.
Indeed, may their memory be forever a blessing. I would like to close this by asking Eric Ferber, our president, if he has any closing remarks, and then we will bring this to a close.
Thank you, Joel. Good evening to you all on this very special pre-Shoah commemorative night. A special welcome to our dear friend and congregant, Dr. Bill Freund, and we also welcome Yola Levine and all family members, daughters Nancy and Sandra, and all relatives and friends who are with us here tonight. We're sorry, Bill, that you can't be with us this year because of COVID, but hope that we'll certainly get to see you next year. Bill is certainly known to our congregation, and as Rob Katz mentioned earlier, Bill was the initiator of the Scholar in Residence program, which has been successfully going on now for the past 15 years and continues much to our delight. On behalf of the Temple Beth Shalom congregation and board of directors, Bill, I want to thank you most sincerely for this very heartwarming and inspiring presentation. I think it's important to note that as the number of Holocaust survivors is really rapidly decreasing, and in this era of increasing anti-Semitism and this era of Holocaust denial, it is particularly important that we never forget. And this message should be directed to the youth. A lot is being done in the Sarasota Manatee area and is being contemplated for the future. Betty Zaret, who is in our audience tonight with the Butterflies of Hope, has been a prime figure in moving this forward and responsible for helping us with education of the Holocaust. Dr. Freund, Bill Freund, has had a brilliant career, and tonight we didn't really have time to discuss all of his books and his academic achievements, but his lectures and his books are well known. My wife, as a college professor, had mentioned his name and his books to her college students well before we ever came down to Sarasota. But I want to focus on two other books of Dr. Freund and Bill Freund. One is The Cookie That Saved My Family, and the other one about Elizabeth and her child. And these books are suitable for ages 4 to 94 and beyond. And I want to tell you that the book, The Cookie That Saved My Family, is very good for youth in that it gives a gentle introduction to some of the horrors that Bill's family went through. So this is an excellent book for children. And incidentally, Bill and I didn't plan this commercial ahead of time, so I'm the proud possessor of his books and I recommend them. Bill, once again, we thank you all for this heartwarming and inspiring presentation, and we look forward to seeing you and Yola and family members with us down in Sarasota next year. We all send you our best wishes.
Thank
Good
you
night.
so much. We love you too.
Best wishes
thank-
to both of
Thank you, Eric.
Thank
you, Eric. And once again, we're closing out the program. Thank you again, Bill, for what we all knew was going to be an amazing presentation, and you didn't disappoint. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to our program, and we hope to see you on future programs. And with that, I will bring this program to a close. Good night, everyone. Stay well.